Surveyor Quek Ting Kiat is a chair of a Building Information Modelling Technical Committee, Quantity Surveying Division, Royal Institution of Surveyors Malaysia, a chartered and registered quantity surveyor. He has 30 years of industry experience and is a member of RISM and the Royal Institution of Chartered Surveyors. He has provided consultancy and training in Malaysia, Singapore and Indonesia. Participant companies, or there are a long list of companies that have undertake his trainings. Maybe I will not read all of them. Few of them may be the Bank Simpanan Nasional and the Ministry of Education. He has presented a lot of papers, and I think with that short introduction, I would like to pass over to Mr. Surveyor Quek to make his presentation. Over to you, Mr. Quek.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning to everybody in the audience. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to grace today's event. I'm not going to present an academic paper, basically, but it's basically something which are some of the findings, although they may be quite preliminary, of what the Institution of Surveyors, Royal Institution of Surveyors, has been doing since 11th of November 2011. As you know, in Malaysia, BEAM is quite new to us. Not that BEAM is new. In fact, it has been around, I was told, probably about something like 30 years. But now it has reached our shores, and sometime in 2011 we decided that it's a good time to actually start looking at BEAM seriously, and more particularly so in trying to collaborate with the other professionals like the architects and the engineers. For your information, at the moment we actually have set up 5 BEAM forums under the auspices of the Royal Institution of Surveyors Malaysia, and these are actually open to everybody. We have BEAM ICT, BEAM Civil, BEAM Building, BEAM Education, and so on. And anybody can actually join us, and some of these discussions, but particularly relating to BEAM ICT, are rather vigorous because we actually have people from the United States, Singapore, and even UK and Hong Kong presenting their views on the current technology level. I myself actually also sit in the committee, Affordable BEAM Committee, which is under CIDB, which has been set up recently, and hopefully we could actually provide some useful inputs into affordable BEAM. In fact, I think this is a very, very good initiative by CIDB as well as CREAM to try to make BEAM affordable to everybody, including the contractors. Now, the other forum which I also sit in is engaging the Malaysian Trade, or rather the MITI, Ministry of Trade and International Affairs, on how to actually promote BEAM as a tool for export competitiveness. This is still ongoing. We have not yet actually reached any conclusions, but it's something I hope will actually raise the level of awareness as well as the uptake in adopting BEAM in Malaysia. And of course, we are also engaged with the Building Presidents Committee on BEAM. We also engaged with JKR in trying to come up with some standards for quantity surveying as far as standard methods of measurement are concerned. All right, so I think without any further ado, I'll just proceed. There are a lot of slides, so most of it I think I'll just breeze through to make the presentation a little bit more light. Otherwise, it could be a bit tedious. All right. Now, the contents of presentation, basically 3 sections. We will look at firstly the essential BEAM thing and what the QS role is all about in BEAM. Secondly, we look at what is BEAM what is the reality now. All right, sometimes it can be actually hyped up, especially software vendors. And BEAM, by the way, is not going to be dominated by software people. It has to be dominated by architects, engineers, and surveyors. All right, so they will determine what BEAM and what is not BEAM. So at the moment, if you say that Revit is BEAM, well, that's only part of the answer. That's not the complete truth. Okay, next. the last one will be actually diving into the crux of the matter, sustainable BIM for quantity surveyors. I do not pretend to know everything about BIM as far as design is concerned, or particularly from the perspective of architect or engineer. But I think in the surveyors institution, we have a fairly good idea of what we want, what kind of standards we are looking at, and what we expect designers to provide us. Okay, so I will not be touching on the other aspects because I'm not conversant in other aspects except what is related to the surveyors. Okay, essential BIM and a QS role. Okay, this is the definition. I'm sure some of you may have actually have seen this by the National Building Sciences Institute, which is based in the US, and they actually define BIM as a series of technologies that are transforming design and construction. In essence, BIM uses information-rich databases to characterize virtually all relevant aspects of a structure or system. Now, it says here, it is quantitatively different from computer-aided design and drafting, CAD, because it is not just a depiction, it is a simulation of the facility. In other words, when we talk about CAD, it's actually just depicting models in 2D or maybe 2.5D and even 3D, right? But when you come to defining BIM, it actually goes beyond that. We are not looking at a model in 3D anymore. We are actually looking at simulations of the model. In fact, you can actually make the model scalable. You can, depending on the dimensions or the attributes you put into the model, it can be scaled and automatically areas, volumes are adjusted. And this makes it so much easier for designers to actually work on their design. And for the quantity surveyor, basically, if a design can be scalable, it also means that costs can be readily determined. We will look at this later on in my presentation. Now, BIM utilizes cutting-edge digital technology to establish a computable representation of all physical and functional characteristics of a facility and its related project and life cycle information, and is intended to be a repository of information for the facility owner or operator to use and maintain throughout the life cycle of a facility. Now, there are keywords here: physical and functional characteristics, because you can actually embed other information in the BIM model. Cost, for example, is one of them. Time and scheduling. You can even put a specification in a model. Fire requirements, green. You can even put carbon footprinting and so on. And this can be actually easily, or ideally, or so-called eventually, it should be readily extracted from the BIM model. So it's not just confined to 2D or 3D information. That's why it's called simulation rather than a depiction. And it's also intended to be a repository of information. Not only is it there as a drawing or plan and whatnot, but it's actually intended for facilities management use once the project is actually handed over, because the information there is so rich, you can actually use it for reference to do your maintenance of buildings and structures and so forth. Okay. Now, BIM is not just about software, which I mentioned earlier. It has three pillars. You have to look at technology, processes, and people. Technology taking up 20% only. Processes, 40%, very important. And of course, last but not least, people. What good is BIM if you don't have the people? You don't have the competency to operate the software, or you don't have the people who have the mindset to actually make sure it succeeds. Okay? So it's not just about hardware, software, and investment. You got to look at project collaboration, how the architects are going to collaborate with the engineers, with the quantity surveyors, and not only that, how are they going to collaborate with the further down the supply chain, for example, contractors, subcontractors, and so on. Because bear in mind, the building industry is such that not everyone knows everything about design. You may actually design a building, but perhaps the curtain walling part has to be done by someone else, not even the engineer or the architect. I may actually need the input of specialist contractors. So how will this jive into the BEAM model? And what are the considerations, liabilities, responsibilities, and all that? That actually has to be considered in total. All right, it's not just exchange information and all that, but later on when it comes to the liability part, everybody tries to put their hands off. So we got to look at the collaborative aspects, and if you are into BEAM, you have to look into the kind of things that you would want to do. Perhaps if you are a quantity surveyor, you may need actually 2 monitors rather than just 1 desktop. Well, one for visualizing the model, the other one for what you call it, computation for BQ production and so on. So that you need to tweak your office according to what you require out of BEAM. And practices, I'll be talking about that later, standards and so forth. And people, competency, capability, training, practice. Unfortunately, as I mentioned earlier, it's still very early stages in Malaysia. So far, the type of training we've been hearing about is actually, done by software people who have actually got some government agency to endorse, but not necessarily CIDB or JKR. All right, they have got this done, but I think for us to move forward, we actually have to look at a holistic the picture, how we are actually going to do it, not just for architects or engineers, but also quantity surveyors, contractors, and so on. And I believe this is one exciting area where we must commend CIDB for taking the initiative to look at this so-called affordable BEAM. Now, QS role, this one, basically I think most of you will understand what our roles as a surveyor involves. Cost estimating, budgeting, tender, cost management, contract management, cost engineering, value engineering. Of course, some of it was also done by engineers, but for quantity surveyors, we are looking at the, how do we say it? Also looking at life cycle costs. We're also looking at impact on feasibility. Alright. So this is something we do as a matter of routine, day in and day out. But of course, BEAM actually gives us a tool to make the processes even more efficient. Now, we have what you call building elements. So every project, all right, we have elements broken down into superstructure, architectural, mechanical, M&E stuff, and all that. And from this grouping, the quantity survey is supposed to come up with a cost plan. In other words, if he has put a cost plan for M&E of so much dollars per meter square, so basically that is the benchmark for the client to monitor the project. So eventually we will have a budget, all right? So that benchmark may need to be altered depending on the final outcome of the design. So basically the cost plan is very, very important for us. And in BEAM, I would say the cost plans would be even more accurate. With BEAM, we can actually do quite accurate cost plans. A case in point, Singapore quantity surveys actually put cost plans of a higher, what do you call it, the rank cost plans much more in terms of priority of importance as to compare to bill of quantities. The reason being Singapore is projects, where I would say 70 to 90% of projects there actually design and build. So more emphasis is on the cost plan because that's where the budgeting is, that's where the money comes from the bank and so on, as compared to just producing bills of quantities. So this is something which not many people know about our neighbor down south. In Malaysia, it's the other way around. We tend to neglect cost plans and put too much emphasis on bill of quantities. That is a fact. All right. So with BEAM, we can look at the question of accuracy of cost early on, because we can actually do more accurate estimates using cost plans. And by the time we reach the BQ stage, hopefully it only runs out 2% or 5% at most. All right. So basically, BEAM is important to the QS in that score. On that score. Now, this is a typical cost plan. Some of you may have seen this. So we actually break down the groupings, and we allocate costs to each grouping. All right. And then we total them up. We divide them by meter square, so we have a good idea about of a particular grouping, how much it will cost per meter square. So basically this is something we do. And next one is the bill of quantities I mentioned just now. Basically we need bill of quantities for pricing purposes. Otherwise, without bill of quantities, how is the contractor going to put his pricing into official writing? All right, so we need quantities, and these quantities basically for every element we actually still have a breakdown in terms of trade elements. For example, if you have a substructure or superstructure or frame, you still have concrete work, you still have steel for reinforcement, you still have formwork. You still got to break it down further, and we have to allocate quantities for each and every of these trades, and also differentiate the different types of concrete, mild steel, high tensile steel, and so forth. So basically these are things some of you will be familiar with as to the work of the quantity surveyor, and this is a portion of a page from bill of quantities. Now the term bill of quantities actually is a misnomer, because when we talk about bill of quantities we only think that it's just quantities. Not really true, because you also have the conditions of contract, the specifications, the particular specifications. We also have the preliminaries bill of quantities, a schedule of what they call that, finishes, and so on and so forth. So it's not just BQ, but most of the time we just say BQ, right? So you can see here there is the rate and the amount there. So the rate is the most important portion, whereby the contractor is supposed to fill in the rate and then pass it on to the QS for evaluation, and from there we see who gives the best optimum tender. Now this is the promise of BEAM to the QS. Theoretically, cost is known immediately, because as I said, the model is scalable, so no matter how you change it, you can actually get the quantities scaled to whatever dimension that is put. Now we will also know the cost impact of all changes and variations. Now this idea is attractive to JKR because they would like to see zero variations, because if everything is supposed to come from the model, there should not be a question of inaccurate measurement of quantities, because everything comes from the model. So this is the promise, one of the promises of BEAM for QS. And BEAM is able to perform immediate cost study and analysis of different building designs. Gone are the days when you will take a QS to come up 10 or maybe 20 iterations of variations of the design. Now with just a matter of hours, you can actually consider all simulations, different kinds of designs. It can be done, but only with BEAM. All right. Now, productivity improvements that comes with it. Quantity take-off time could be reduced by half. This is actually a fact. It's no more fiction. For example, it may take you a month to do quantity take-off, but with BEAM you can actually do it within 2 weeks, assuming all drawings are near perfect. There are no perfect drawings. All right. So assuming, right? So if the drawings are not perfect, of course that 2 week doesn't apply, because you still have to go back and forth, engineer, architect, clarification, and all that. So if the drawings are imperfect, it's not going to work. All right. Now accuracy of quantities also improves reliability. The more accurate the quantities are, the more certain you are about the final contract sum. All quantities and dimensions are linked to drawings, so if the architect decides to do a change in the plans, he can do so, and then the quantities will just be easily extracted out by the quantity surveyor, and you can actually cost it out, and you know the cost implications. Now revision of design can be tracked and quantities revised. basically you can actually use it in conjunction with a project, let's say information management system, so you know when and where and who sent what on which date and what was the issue about, and then you just send the corrections or amendments and so on and so forth, and all this can be tracked easily, hence reducing the chances of conflict and ensuring transparency, which also means that dispute resolution can be made much faster and easily. Okay? Now, what are the realistic expectations of BEAM for QS? No, you have promises, you have productivity, things and all that. Now, what is realistic is that the QS definitely will save time in quantity takeoff. Accuracy is actually enhanced, and we are actually able to relate cost to specific elements and components because we are using the information from the model itself. All right. Now, problem with a traditional quantity surveying using scale rule, if we still are, some firms still do actually, is that you can actually use the wrong scale, and you can also, because of the scale, it can be a point, it can be 0.5% out or 5% out, depending on which type of the scale rule you're looking at. So that is the shortcoming of a manual measurement. But with BEAM, you are quite assured it's 99.99% accurate. We can also trace changes and the cost impacts fairly easily. Now, the challenges, we mentioned about manpower challenges also. Malaysia, it's still, the knowledge in BEAM, you could say is still very lacking. And the truism is that very few, even architects themselves, want to embrace BEAM wholeheartedly, because the danger they perceive is that once you train somebody in BEAM, he or she could be easily pinched by another firm. So why do you want to invest 25,000-30,000 in training only to be pinched by another competitor? So this is a real issue, all right, for consultants over here. And also we do not have sufficient supporting consultants knowledgeable in BEAM. How to lead this BEAM forward? Because the basically the local consultants are still finding their way through, right? We don't really have a way forward. Although early next month, JKR will be presenting a BEAM roadmap for Malaysia. So hopefully we may want to, we may be able to know what they have in store, and then from there maybe we can look at collaboration, not only locally but also foreign consultants. All right. Lack of technological guides for BEAM. Here again, we want to be sure what is BEAM is supposed to be BEAM, not just another 3D software program, because in the ISM, Royal Institution Surveyors, we also have been approached by software people and say, can you please certify us as BEAM software? How can we? Because we know that you need to meet a number of criteria, one of which is you have to be IFC compliant, because that's the standard set by Building Smart International. All right. It's not just 3D, because you're also looking at 4D, 5D, 6D stuff, you know, carbon stuff, cost stuff, scheduling stuff. So 3D alone doesn't cut it. Okay. Lack of locally customized BEAM or digital object library. This is a serious problem, even though Singapore is about 7 years ahead of us. They have not been actually able to come out with a digital object library, even up to now, as I stand here and speak. There's no standardized digital object library. In UK, under the government initiatives, Bentley, Revit, ArchiCAD, somehow they've got some agreement, all right, on certain standard digital object libraries, but these are also not comprehensive. They have only about 400 something. But as you know, it's not enough. When you do actually, if you are in the architectural practice, you need much more than that. 400 is not enough, all right? But at least it is fairly standard in the UK, but in Singapore, still struggling with, although I understand that they are already making progress. Malaysia, we have not really thought about it. Okay. Now, lack of collaborative design processes. How are the consultants supposed to collaborate with each other? Later on, towards the end of the presentation, I will show you a flyer which institution is actually organizing on the 11th of April, how the responsibility matrix for BEAM is going to look like. So if you are keen to look into this workshop, there's information at the end of presentation. And last but not least, there's the serious problem of trying to facilitate BEAM or using BEAM to prepare BQ for pre-tender purposes. All right, sometimes it just doesn't work because there are too many mistakes, too many inconsistency in the BEAM model, and within a short time, 2 weeks or even 1 month, it may not actually work because we were told, or rather we have done some studies, if a design takes about 3-4 months to complete, the first time you do it in BEAM, it's going to take you 5 or 6 months because there's going to be a steep learning curve. Everybody is not familiar, and you have to pay a price for it. You have to actually muddle your way through. And in Singapore, they say you have to be at least having 6 BEAM projects before you actually get a feel of what it's all about. So you can imagine what we are in for, right? So, but nevertheless, the benefits actually outweigh all these challenges, as we will see later on. So what is the workflow for QSs? Now for QSs, they must receive the BEAM model either in DWF or IFC format, whether it's Revit or whatever, must come in DWF or IFC. And basically these DWF or IFC, they actually compress into 3D PDF files, which are also readable, and also you can actually extract information out of it. Then the QS has to audit the model if we don't have a BEAM manager. Now you have a BEAM manager, which is something new here, which also is being tried out in Singapore. The BEAM manager is supposed to take care of all that. But if you don't have a BEAM manager, I don't know whether the QS can actually do it. Because you are talking about getting design and then looking at the design and telling people, I don't think this is adequate, you need changes. I'm not sure. Maybe this is the raw architect, I don't know. All right, this is something we have to really think about. And then extract the model map and then object properties for quantity takeoff. That means from the BEAM model, we extract the attributes needed for preparing the BQ, and then we prepare the cost plan and bill of quantities. All right, so from a single element, let's say for example a column or pillar, you can actually get all kinds of information: concrete, formwork, reinforcement, steel and fireproofing. So it's not just a column. So embedded in it, you have all the information about concrete, formwork, reinforcement. And if it's finishes, we also will know about the plastering, the painting, the tiles, the cladding. So all this has to be modeled correctly on the elements or components. Otherwise, there's no way you can actually extract it out. Okay? How will QS fit into emerging BEAM roles? No clear answer yet. If you look from a strategic point of view, management point of view, production point of view, BEAM is supposed to have a BEAM manager to do all the coordination. And you also have a coordinator. Coordinator basically comes from the contractor side, right? BEAM manager is representing the client. You also have a modeler. The modeler is the one who produces the architectural model, the structural models, the M&E models. So where does the QS fit into all this? Because the QS is not a designer, right? At which stage does he come into it? So, we don't have any answers as yet. Now the reality checkup for everyone. This is what we actually did. We actually studied the documents from Singapore and to see whether they can actually be adopted. One of these is on document control. What are the documents you need to control when you are talking about BEAM? How do you classify the costs? All right. And then when it comes to CAD, now although we are talking about BEAM, CAD is also very important because when it comes to legal precedent or priority of ranking, the CAD model always outranks the BEAM model. In other words, the 2D model is more important than the 3D model. That is something we have to think about. That's why we still have to look at CAD. All right. For example, how do you color the layers? What are the line types? How do you call them, and so forth, so on and so forth? What are the drafting conventions? How do you organize and name your CAD files? You can't just simply name any file or any layer in a drawing according to your girlfriend's name or boyfriend's. You can't do that. All right. So it has to be organized. And then the CAD symbols, the arrows, dotted lines, hidden lines, there are conventions you have to follow. All right. All right. And the other thing is also about standard methods of measurement. Singapore has adopted although it was written 2002, but I think it's 2004 they supposed to be adopted by the Singapore Institute of Surveyors and Valuers. But very few QSs have actually used this as a reference for measuring quantities, because a lot of the QSs there don't understand it. All right, and this is something, if you want to talk about electronic measurement, this is also something which we are going to face in Malaysia. It's going to be an uphill task, trying to even create, to educate and create awareness. But it can be done with the proper push. Okay, we also have standards of measurement for M&E works, which we went through. And then at the end of the building completion, what are the documents we want to look at? What are the information that needs to be exchanged? What sort of formats? Because you need this for facilities management. We had a look at this from Singapore. We also had something from Hong Kong. They don't have a government policy as such overarching the industry. So the initiative is actually basically taken by one authority, which is the Hong Kong Housing Authority. They have actually documents on BEAM, certain standards which they need to follow. Okay, so this is something we have gone through. And we also look at their BEAM user guide. We also looked at the BEAM spreadsheet guide in Hong Kong. When we say we look through, we actually look through. But we did not go into very detailed study, because that would take a very, very long time. And again, at the end of it, whether we adopt it or not is another question. But basically, we could actually formulate certain ideas about it and some general conclusions. And our findings were this: we need standards, actually. Whether it's Hong Kong, Singapore, Malaysia, or whatever, we need BEAM standards. But the problem is, what kind of standards? There's something we are not able to answer as yet, because quantity surveyors cannot answer this alone. We need everybody to work with and come up with the right answers. Now, which of these standards do we adopt and adapt? Again, the answer is elusive. And as we saw, standards, Hong Kong, Singapore, UK, whatever, US, they vary from country to country, even firm to firm. For example, how architect A names his objects is going to be very different from architect B, architect C. In the end, you have a mishmash of what? Definitions varying from firm to firm, and there's no standardization whatsoever. Because I can say window is W-I-N-D-O-W, and then something something. I can also call window W-D-W. I also can call window W-D. So which is the correct standard? So this is something which is a real headache at this moment. Now, there's also a reality disconnect. Even though Singapore has been ahead of us 6 or 7 years, what is actually practiced and what is required in their own codes of practices and standard is not the same. There's a fact. You have standards, but not everybody follows. What the government in Singapore is trying to say is, look, 2013, we want all architectural drawings to be in BEAM. They must be submitted in BEAM. 2015, M&E drawing must be in BEAM. But it remains silent on the standardization of the objects. When I say objects, it means design objects. They can be furniture, they can be walls, can be what. These are not standardized yet. All right, and nobody has got the standard library as yet. Now, main problem as we see it from the Royal Institution Surveyors Malaysia's perspective is that naming convention, that's the number one problem, and then consistently applying this throughout. For example, we say the naming convention for project filing, identification and documentation tends to vary from user to user. That's number one at the project filing or project naming stage. The other one is naming convention for design object libraries coming into design objects. Groupings, families, etc. varies from software to software, user to user. Problem. Okay? And this is something which we collaborated with Singapore Institute of Architects. And as you can see on your left here, there are all kinds of ways of naming a door. You can have XDBL, you can have double meta, you can have door components, but actually, what is the correct way of naming it? So even a door can be named in so many ways. 3, 4, 5, even 10 different ways. I don't think that is acceptable. It is not standard at all. There is no standard in Singapore, and this comes from somebody who's sitting in the SIA. So he says, for example, 4-panel sliding doors. You don't actually see it. How do you name a 4-panel sliding door? So at the moment, nobody has the answer. Okay? And this is also something which this particular person brought up during the recent SIA briefing to Singapore Institute of Architects, 1st of March. Now he gave example of precast wall, as you can see in the middle. Precast wall 100 plus 45 kitchen finishes. You also have precast 100. You also have precast somewhere above. And then you have brick, external, internal. Okay, is this the correct way of naming it? Again, it looks like a mess. Why do you have precast wall and then kitchen finish, and then later on you have a precast wall again, but not kitchen finish? So, what is the correct convention? So, if you think that beam is so simple as just putting lines or putting objects, it's not that. The worst thing is trying to get your naming correct. Just like trying to name your son or daughter, giving your son or daughter a correct name. Alright? It's the same thing is happening in BIM. So this is the reality I'm talking about. Alright? Sustainable BIM for QS, clear standards and practices. Because without that, QS role is basically going to be hampered. And then the other thing we have to look at is BIM must be contractually enforceable. Okay? Now, should the QS bear the brunt of an imperfect BIM world? Now, Ben Tam of SIA-CAD in his presentation to Singapore Institute of Architects mentioned there should ideally be a single point of truth. All right. Now, what he found out was that although IFC format is supposed to be the de facto standard for BIM, he frankly says IFC sucks because it crashes too often. Right? IFC file is very, very big. So you try to export it from, let's say, a software vendor like Revit, you export it to ArchiCAD using IFC, most of the time it's going to crash because the BIM model is particularly huge, consumes a lot of data, and you say, frankly, I don't think it even works. This is coming from somebody who's using it, and somebody who also designs software, because he himself is an architect, he himself also designs software. All right? So a lot of people have promised so many things about BIM, but the reality is such that we are not even there as yet. Okay? Now, QS is in no position to determine the standards or naming convention for design object libraries to suit his BQ coding. We are not in the position. We are not the designers. We don't own the digital object library. Who owns it? Either the architect, engineer, and in some cases there's the client. So unless these three people get their act together, we can't do anything. So every time you have a different set of naming convention, imagine the poor QS trying to fit his BQ coding according to somebody else's whims and fancy. If I change it from WDW, I name it WD or W, imagine what kind of work the QS will be put into. It's going to be messy. That's just Windows. What about other things? So this is where it's a fact. We can't do anything unless the designers or the client gets their acts together. Now designers, even though they may be familiar with naming conventions and have repeated experience in these, will make errors, definitely, due to variations in particular objects and complexities in the design. Even though you have done it many times before, but every project is so unique, it's so different, it's so complex, inevitably you make mistakes, and these mistakes, if they are not checked and it's just passed on to the QS, it's going to be magnified manifold. This is serious, all right? So in the absence of a BIM manager or BIM model checker, QS cannot assume that all quantity information can be exactly extracted to fit the matching BQ item description. Rework is required, okay? Truth about IFC, often has been hyped so much. You say IFC, because there's BIM, but basically there's no such thing as 100% exchange between software apps. Every time you export it from Revit to IFC, from Revit to ArchiCAD, or from ArchiCAD to Revit, some information is going to be lost. And if this information is going to be lost, you cannot expect the quantity surveyor to actually produce perfect quantities. No way that's going to happen. So these are the constraints as far as we are concerned about BIM. All right, but nevertheless, IFC is still useful because most of the facilities managers, they actually rely on COBie, COBie, which is a Construction Object Building Information Exchange, which is a subset of IFC. And from COBie, they actually have a lot of ways to deal with information for facilities management. So you can't still run away from IFC. You still need it. But how do we actually use it without errors? That's the big question, all right? All right. Even in the US, even though they started it first, and the US Army Corps is at the forefront of BIM, they still have a problem with naming conventions. Right? One of the attempts is called SPI, Specifiers Properties Information Exchange, which is a part of the COBie discussion, but it's stuck and it's not complete here. So this I'm quoting from our RISM BIM SMM forum. Incidentally, he's a Russian expert in BIM, and he made this comment. Even in the US, they are still stuck with naming convention. They haven't even got their act together, in spite of all the hype. All right? So how do we solve this problem about naming convention? So basically, a few alternatives, few ways of doing it. Number one, owners define the naming convention, because ultimately you own the information. You are going to run the facilities. So what has happened in Singapore is that the Real Estate Housing Developers Association of Singapore finally said, enough is enough. I think it's about time we step into this. We are going to produce the digital object libraries, and the consultants, enough of quibbling, enough of whatever. You are going to use this, follow our standards. All right, so that's the direction they are heading towards now. But we have not seen the actual product yet. Right, maybe it may take another year or so. The other thing is that we need to have quality control checks using automated software to verify whether the expected attributes or naming conventions are actually applied to the BIM objects. There are softwares available which can actually detect whether the name is correct and which objects have been named incorrectly and all that. So maybe there's another way of going, what do you call it, approaching the subject. The other way is, it doesn't matter whether you're IFC or not, because there are also browser technology available which can actually capture whatever design there is, Revit, ArchiCAD and all that, and actually from there you can still extract the information fairly accurately. So this is talking about browser technology, which is independent of the BIM software platform. Okay, so these are some of the things we still need to talk about. Okay, so unless and until the conventions are defined, variability in naming will be expected, and QS will definitely suffer if we actually try to do quantities relying on beam 100%. It's not going to work out. Okay, so this is some of the naming conventions, and you will see Q, quantity surveyors. This is taken from UK. Quantity surveyors are there. So if you're thinking that QS has no role, that's not true because they are there, right? Okay, and then these are some of the ways you name in UK, all right? G25 wall brick. That's what you mean by an object file name, right? But is everybody going to follow this? I don't know, all right? But at least UK, they have done something. All right, so the next issue, I just have 1 or 2 minutes, is basically before you do anything concerning Bing, you have to modify your conditions of contract. Whether there's JKR or IEM or PAM form, you have to modify. You have to use either the AIA Building Information Protocol or the consensus documents for BEAM addendum. This allows the condition of contract to import the agreement amongst the various parties, for example, the architects, engineers, so forth, on their roles and responsibility. Because without these documents, you employ an architect, it's not going to carry any legal enforceability. So you need these documents. All right. So in a jiffy, I'll just mention some of the issues, contractual issues, interoperability issues, and data loss. All right. These are issues, serious issues. And then also the liability gap. The guy who sells you the software is going to escape unscathed. And if you are a consultant and you rely on his software, you have unlimited liability. You can't sue the software fellow. The software fellow is going to say, oh, I'm sorry, I just give you a refund 25,000 US. All right, but you are going to land up with a hefty bill. That's the liability gap, if you're not careful when you implement. Data misuse, all right, for purposes not suitable, right? You use a different scale of beam, use it for manufacturing, for example, you are going to be liable. Intellectual property issues, who owns? Is it the owner, architect? This also has to be verified. Data loss, legal status of the model, whether it is a co-contract document, or is it an inferential document, or is it an accommodation document. So these things have to be thoroughly thought about. Okay, standard of care for beam, you cannot just say, well, sorry, we'll do a site measurement. It's not going to cut, because with beam, nobody expects you to do it. They want perfect. You cannot say we go to site and do measurement. So you're going to have to adjust yourself to suit all these different ways of doing work. Okay. Design delegation, what happens? You delegate the curtain walling design to somebody else. What is the liability going to be like? Is it going to be the curtain waller's liability, or architect, or joint? These things have to be addressed. All right. Who owns the information? How is it going to be preserved? If there's data degradation, who is responsible? Things like that got to be thought through. And what is the legality of a collaborative framework? Because if you're still using JKR or PAM, condition of contract, there's no such thing as collaboration. It's still hands off, and to a certain extent, adversarial. Right? So how do you actually collaborate? Such a big word, collaborate. But in reality, everybody wants to pinpoint liability, fault finding, and so on. All right. These are things we have to look at. How do we allocate risk in BIM? What is the standard of care for design professionals? QSs can also be sued if they rely entirely on the BIM model for quantities, because somebody can say, why didn't you check? There's no such thing as getting away scot-free. Okay, and then economic loss. If BIM is not part of the joint reliance, if there's no agreement, the client can actually sue you. He says, who asked you to use BIM? Right? So these are things we really actually have to really think about. Okay, so I will just conclude. Because of the benefits, BIM must stay. All right? But even it's going to take a lot of pain for us, we have to use it. All right, but for QSs, we are quite clear of what we want. We want clear standards from the designers, and we want contractual enforceability. You know, you can't just say, assume everybody, oh, okay, we work in BIM, but there's no contract, there's no responsibility matrix. That won't do, okay? Okay, so this is a work of institutional survey, as I mentioned, 5 forums, all right? If you're interested, you can always email me, you can join in. It's open to everybody, not just surveyors. Okay, these are the references, credits, and as I mentioned just now, on the 11th of April next month, we are having a BIM guidelines and responsibility matrix. Speaker from Singapore is going to share his experiences with us in Malaysia, and hopefully we are not going to make the same mistakes. All right, so that's the advantage when we are not at the early stage. We can always look at somebody else ahead of us and try not to repeat. So that's on the 11th of April. If you, for more information, you can actually contact the Institution of Surveyors, or you can email QSDIV, all small letters, QSDIV at rism.org.my. QSDIV at rism.org.my. Thank you very much. Right.
Okay, thank you very much, Surveyor Quek. Very enlightening presentation. I would like to invite you to sit beside me. We are going to proceed for the last part of this session. I think we are moving to a panel discussion. Because of that, I would like to invite all the 2 speakers to come on stage with me. So we are going to proceed with our panel discussion. So now I would like to open to members of the floor. If you have any question, whatever clarification that you want to raise, this is the time that you will take the opportunity to direct your questions or your inquiry to our learned speakers. Okay, I open to the members of the floor.
With regard to BIM, actually this is a good, building information modeling is good, especially for me like facilities manager. The problem is, like you say, I'm from Perbadan Putrajaya. When we construct Perbadan Putrajaya, we start with, we try this automation. We also take the cue from Singapore in the building plan approval. And we have a lot of problems until now, about 12 years, we are still having the same problem. One you say is about the standards. When we fix the standards, because we are using the AutoCAD, we have a problem with our local architects. Because they have use of different platform of software. That's a problem. And one other thing is the reluctance of the architect, because it involves a lot of costs. Because they are in 1996, the AutoCAD is quite expensive. So we're still having a problem. So BIM is very good, especially in total asset life cycle, where you want to do facility management, asset management is very good. But like you say, getting the standards, like I'm in Perbadan Putrajaya, after 12 years, we are still having problem with standardization, you see. When you ask them to use this layer, that layer, and we still have a lot of problem. One thing is also is the cost. The infrastructure cost is very expensive, especially you have to spend on ICT, whether our consultant, our architects, engineers, and also QS, are they willing for a small firm to spend a lot of money? Because we spend about nearly 60 million to develop our system. That's we have the government backup, but if you are talking about local consultant, unless the government or the society give help to them for the software, that's just one thing. BIM is very good, I admit it. And then for about the sustainable construction, because the end is to reduce the carbon emission. So the best way in Malaysia is through IBS, because you reduce construction on site, so off site. But the problem with IBS now in Malaysia, the cost is slightly higher than the conventional construction. So that's why our contractors, and also I'm developing, I still go for the conventional because of the cost. I'm stuck with the cost. I was given this amount. If I go for IBS, I have to increase, let's say, by 30%. So I cannot get the amount. That's why there's a difficult. You try to reduce sustainable development, but on the other side, we as a developer, we try to maximize profit. And I, as a government servant, I'm stuck with the budget given to me. So how can we solve this problem? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Cik Razali. So I would say there are two questions. One is on BEAM, and one is on sustainable construction. Because of you have intention to go to sustainable construction, but the problem is, of course, your initial cost, because IBS cost comparatively much higher than conventional method of construction. Okay, you go for the first one. Maybe Surveyor Quek would like to respond to the first questions.
Yeah, actually, not much to respond to, because your comments are all equally valid. The problem is BEAM as it stands now is very expensive. That's why CIDB is looking at affordable BEAM, because unless that is addressed, we don't see small consulting firms, even QSs. QSs don't make much money actually, adopting BEAM on a large scale. And not only QSs, even the architects themselves find it costly. You know, for example, one software costs you easily the price of a Produa. So it's you know, and that's just a software. What about the training? Easily training and all that is going. If you cost it in, it's going to cost you about 20,000 a head. And what happens if the staff gets pinched? You know, these are real serious issues. So, but fortunately, I think there are solutions. One of them is there are actually software available which makes BEAM affordable. They may not be full-fledged BEAM, but basically enough for us to work on, because we don't need, for example, you want to travel from A to B, do you really need a Mercedes or Porsche? No need. If you have a Kancil or what they call it, some cheaper car, you still do the same thing. So I think there are solutions, fortunately, but this has only come about in the last 1 or 2 years, and I think it's timely that CIDB and CREAM actually set up this committee, because basically it will help everybody and actually demystify a lot of things about BEAM, about having to buy, but then in the end being saddled with high costs. That's not what we want. All right. The other model to go about is not only is it affordable, we also look at pay per use rather than pay upfront for the software. Pay per use means maybe monthly kind of thing. There are actually a number of software people who are actually looking at this model. Maybe you pay a couple of $100 a month, right, per user or something, which may be cost effective rather than paying 8,000 or 9,000 US upfront. So that's something we certainly look forward to. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Surveyor Quek. Now to the next question is on sustainable construction. Maybe Dr. Oya, can you respond to this?
Well, it's a very difficult question to try and answer. I have some familiarity with the IBS system, coming to Malaysia from time to time. In the UK, I do some work with a company called Langs, and Langs is a very big contractor, and like a number of other big contractors out there, they are looking at moving as much as possible of construction off-site, so prefabricating stuff and then bringing it on site, and they're obviously moving to that model because they think there's going to be large cost savings involved. They're winning work, so they're able to. I mean, they've invested heavily in building facilities where they can manufacture components, and on the back of that they are winning work. I mean, the fact that you're saying that your experience here is different, that it will lead to higher construction costs, seems to conflict with the information that I have for the UK. And I mean, one of the other reasons that they want to do do this is because of health and safety issues, which is very high on the agenda. So if they can reduce the amount of construction which takes place, there will be benefits for that side. The other thing perhaps worth mentioning is that, I mean, why is it that IBS is being encouraged here? So it's you're perhaps looking at this quite narrowly for obvious reasons, but there is a much bigger picture as to why the government have been pushing that system in this country, and perhaps some of those costs. I mean, there'll be savings overall, but as far as maybe consultants concerned, they are having to pick up a proportion of the tab, and which is not necessarily a good thing.
Good afternoon to everyone. I'm Engineer Mohammad Azhar from KLCC. Two questions. One's for Dr. Gill, and another one is for Dr. Chakyana. What is, in your opinion, Dr. Gill, the right combination of accountability when it comes to hill slopes development? For example, from the authority side to the designers to the constructors. For example, what are the liability holds on to supporting agencies like DOE, DOSH? So how would they come into play in hill slope developments? Dr. Chakyana, about your SAS appraisal, is there any correlation with your SAS with regards to the GRI? Sustainability, when we talk about sustainability, we talk about GRI, which is Global Reporting Initiatives. Is there any correlation of your SAS appraisal that requires third-party assessment to have the accuracy of your SAS assessment? And as for Mr. Quek, I just say I would support BEAM. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Engineer Azhar. So I think I was basically two questions. Even you use 3 items. Basically, it's 2 questions. The third one is your comment to you are supporting BEAM. Okay. All right. So the first question more on the liability of hill slope development. I think that one will be covered by Dr. Gui.
I'm not sure whether I'm qualified to talk about liability. It's a legal issue. But anyway, I don't. You see, let's start with the development project developer. Okay? The question is, developer always set up a company. They don't use the parent company to start a project. After the defect liability period, they close down the company. The question is, as Sendem Berhad, it's no longer there. So this is exactly the Tan Sri Raymond Navaratnam have been chasing for answer for this. His bungalow in the foothill of the Genting, there's a landslide, not very big landslide, minor landslide hit into his house, and he looked for a developer, but the developer has closed shop. Obviously, then he said, well, I will look for the authority that approved the project. But under the Act, if you look at the Act carefully, the local authority is not responsible, because it's a professional that's responsible, unless some people argue that if it's a local authority wrongly approved the project, yes, they can be liable. Look at the Highland Tower. Initially, the local authority is responsible. In the appeal, the local authority is not responsible. Despite that, allow non-qualified architect to submit. It's a draft person to submit. So that's part of the developer. Okay, now what about professionals? Bad news for professionals. You are liable. Unlimited liability. Not like some country, there's a limit of liability. After 6 years or 10 years, you're not liable. Professionals, sorry, at the moment. There's some discussions on the limit of liability, but so far there is no progress. Thank you.
Okay. Dr. Quek. So we go to the next question. is there any correlation between SARS and GRI? Okay.
A very short answer. I'm not familiar with this. I'm not even familiar with the acronym. It's GI.
And when it comes to sustainability, when it comes to the accuracy of the assessments, so we're using GRI as one of the initiatives, global reporting initiatives, to ensure that the reports are sustainable, transparent. So in your SARS, was there any correlation between your appraisal with GRIs?
No.
Okay. No.
No.
Fine.
No.
Sure,
No,
sure. Okay.
There wasn't.
It wasn't. All right, thanks.
Very short answer. Any questions? More? Yeah, please.
Hello, good afternoon. Omar, again from FRIM. This question is I direct to Dr. Arya. In your calculation, you showed the example calculation that you showed the amount of carbon emission. Some of the figures that you used was based on the HGV, the heavy goods vehicles, and that figures are based on the current values. And with the lifespan of 120 years, I believe it's going to be changed in 120 years. It's not going to be constant. In fact, with the advent of hybrid vehicles using electricity, I guess the carbon emission is going to be reduced. So is that right to use the same values throughout the 92 years? I mean 120 years? And then the second question is, in the end, after you showed the example, it shows that the tree design, the tree bridges that you showed has got not really big significant in terms of the value of the normalized weightage. So it seems that in the end, when you to make a decision, it's always based on some subjective argument. So will it be the decision made by architect, engineer, or the politician? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Umar. So you have raised two questions, and both of these questions are been directed to Dr. Arya. Okay.
What we've tried to do with this particular tool is that we've come up with a comparative measure. So so the absolute numbers, because there may be some value in terms of the absolute numbers. I agree, and things are likely to change, but I mean that's engineering for us, and we're making predictions all the time, and so we've made some assumptions, and we've applied those same assumptions to each of the alternatives. Yes, things are going to change. It's the same thing with costs, and yet we make these kind of comparisons all the time and don't really worry about them too much. So I think the same thing will apply. What was the other question? I've forgotten. Oh, who makes the decision? Well, as far as what we were trying to do was to develop a tool for civil engineers and for civil engineering structures. So I think this decision is going to be made by the engineer in consultation with the client, because there's going to be costs involved, and I think when the engineer is producing the program report, as is traditionally the case, he will discuss the merits of alternatives, and then come up with his advice. But it's up to the client whether he accepts it or not. because it will depend on factors which are in the client's gift.
So I think with that I would like to pass over to the Secretariat. Over to you, Dr. Gerard.